My name is Cassandra Bennett. I'm 38 years old and live in the western suburbs of Chicago. I'm a single mother to Emily, my 12-year-old daughter. From the outside, my life might look steady enough: a full time job at a major medical technology company, a modest but comfortable apartment, and a bright, well behaved child. But behind that stability are 5 years of endless effort, sleepless nights, and weekends my daughter spent alone while her mother worked. I work at Vital Core Systems, a company that develops and manages medical technology solutions, from patient tracking devices to large scale logistics systems for hospitals and clinics across the Midwest. My position is head of logistics operations. In other words, if a shipment doesn't arrive on time or a hospital system crashes, I'm the one who gets the call in the middle of the night. I joined Vital Core right after my divorce. Emily was only 7 then. I didn't have many options. I needed a steady job, something that could cover rent, insurance, childcare, and the last of my student loans. Vital Core seemed like a good opportunity. They needed someone experienced, resilient under pressure, and flexible with time. I had all three. In the 5 years I've been here, I've never turned down an assignment. I've handled delayed contracts, built contingency systems when the main network failed, and stopped more than one crisis that could have shut down a hospital. Once, on Emily's birthday, I had to cancel her small party because of a data error from a clinic in Des Moines. She didn't complain, just looked at me with quiet disappointment. I still remember that look, even now. I kept telling myself it would all pay off, that the sacrifices, the unpaid overtime, the extra work outside my role would prove I was ready for something greater. About a year ago, when our logistics director, Mr. Sherman, announced his retirement, I was called into the HR office by Greg Sanders to talk about a growth opportunity. Greg was someone I respected deeply. He wasn't manipulative or performative, just careful, observant, and genuinely attentive to his people. When I entered his office, he said plainly, "Cassandra, you've done an excellent job. I believe you're fully capable of stepping into Sherman's role." Linda agrees. Linda Montgomery, the CEO of Vital Core, was a powerful woman, once featured on the cover of a leading health tech magazine as the woman defining post pandemic healthcare. I admired her and believed that in a company led by women, merit would finally mean something. For the first time in years, I felt I was moving in the right direction. Greg asked me to keep things confidential until the board approved the promotion. I agreed. I didn't tell anyone, not even Emily. I just worked harder, more precisely, more thoroughly, readying myself for the position I thought I had earned. Weeks turned into months. I started getting invited to higher level meetings, leading strategic projects instead of just operational ones. Each time a session ended, other departments complimented my insights. I began to think maybe this was it, the moment my work would finally be recognized. I remember that meeting like it happened yesterday. The entire executive team, mid level managers, and a few board members were present. Everyone expected Linda to announce Sherman's successor. Greg gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I smiled faintly, adjusted my blouse collar, and took a deep breath. I had no idea that within minutes, everything I believed in would collapse like a sandcastle in the tide. At the time, I still believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed patient, and kept your head down, eventually you'd be rewarded. But life doesn't always move in straight lines. Sometimes, just when you think you're ready to rise, someone quietly pulls the rug out from under you. If you've made it this far, maybe you've lived through a moment like that, when loyalty is dismissed, when years of effort are erased without a word. If so, you're not alone. I hope my story reaches you in a way only those who've endured it can understand. And if you can, tell me where you're listening from. Just one comment. That's all I ask. I'd love to know who's walking this road with me. The conference room that morning was unnervingly quiet. The air was thick, heavy, as if someone had just spoken a truth everyone else was too afraid to admit. I looked around. Greg sat frowning, his hands clasped tightly on the table as though holding something back. And Linda, with her neatly curled hair, dark blue blazer, and that confident gaze, stood at the head of the table smiling like she was about to hand out the greatest gift of the year. After careful consideration and full agreement from the board, she said, "I'm delighted to announce that Ava Montgomery will officially take on the role of Director of Supply Chain Operations starting next month." I froze. Ava was sitting just 3 seats away from me. She blinked a few times, pretending to be surprised, then stood up and walked toward Linda like an actress being called on stage to receive her award. In that moment, I still couldn't grasp what was happening. Something inside me screamed, but my body stayed still. Linda placed a hand on Ava's shoulder and turned back to the room. Ava has shown remarkable vision and adaptability during her short trial period. I believe she'll bring a fresh perspective to our executive team. I hope you'll all support her the same way you supported Sherman. A few claps echoed through the room. Hesitant, half-hearted. I clapped too, out of reflex because there was nothing else I could do. It felt like being slapped in the face and told to smile about it. So I did. A thin, polite smile, the kind expected from someone who knows her place. Ava returned to her seat. Her eyes passed over me, not with arrogance, not even acknowledgement. It was as if I didn't exist at all, like I was just part of the furniture. Linda kept talking, but I no longer heard a word. Her voice became distant, meaningless. In my mind, flashes of memory unspooled like a reel of film. The nights I stayed at the office past midnight, the emergency calls from hospitals, the projects I built, the system failures. I stopped minutes before launch. I had saved this entire operation more than once, and now all of it had been erased by one decision born of bloodline. Ava was Linda's niece. She had joined the company only 3 months ago as Linda's personal assistant. No independent projects, no real responsibilities, and certainly no life or death decisions under pressure. But now she was the one in charge, the position I'd spent 5 years working toward. The meeting dragged on for another half hour. I sat motionless, not taking notes, not asking questions, just holding my face steady. When people finally began leaving, I stood up a little slower than usual. Greg walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said enough: sympathy, regret, maybe guilt. Then he let go, because he knew nothing he said could make it right. I packed my laptop and notebook. Out in the hallway, I saw Ava laughing with a few people from administration. She looked radiant, confident, like she'd been waiting for this day all along. I walked past her without stopping. She didn't even look at me. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop, typed my password, and stared at the blank screen. My fingers hovered above the keys, but didn't move. Everything in front of me blurred. Not because I wanted to cry, but because my mind had gone strangely silent. Around me, keyboards clicked, phones rang, footsteps passed. The world kept spinning, completely indifferent to the fact that I had just been pushed aside. The afternoon drifted by in a haze. I went through the motions, answered a few emails, reviewed next week's meeting schedule, and sent out the inventory report. Everything was flawless, smooth, precise, just like the last 5 years. But one thing had changed, something I couldn't pretend not to see anymore. I no longer believed in this place. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. Autumn had just begun to touch Chicago, the air turning cool after sunset. Emily sat at the dining table, working on her math homework. She looked up, surprised, then smiled when she saw me. "I thought you had a late meeting tonight." I smiled faintly, set my bag down, and sat across from her. "Not tonight. I wanted to have dinner with you." She frowned a little. "Something wrong, Mom?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I just wanted to be here with you." I watched her bend over her notebook again, her hair falling gently across her cheek. How many moments like this had I missed? How many times had I promised myself I'd make it up to her someday? But when exactly is someday? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every detail of that morning replayed in my mind. The hesitant applause, Linda's satisfied smile, Ava's smug little nod, Greg's helpless expression. I turned over, reached for my phone, and reopened the internal announcement email that had gone out earlier that afternoon. "We are confident Ava will continue Sherman's legacy and lead the operations team into a new era. A new era." I turned off the screen, set the phone aside, and lay there in the dark. For the first time in a long while, I heard a voice in my head. Not the one that told me to be patient, not the one that said, keep your head down. It was something else entirely. Maybe it was time to stop staying quiet. I arrived at the office early the next morning, before sunrise. The building lights were still off, the hallway cold with the damp chill that rose from the tile floors. I made a strong cup of coffee in the small kitchen and sat alone in the empty workspace. No one was there, only the soft hum of the ventilation and the faint glow of my computer screen coming to life. I didn't open my emails or check my meeting schedule. Instead, I opened a blank Word document and started typing. Not a report, not a memo, a resignation letter. Not because I wanted to give up, but because I wanted to take back control of my own story. Yet when I reached the words, Dear Executive Board, my hands stopped. Something didn't feel right. Something was missing. I had spent 5 years building everything here, the systems, the supply chains, the partnerships. I couldn't just walk away quietly, leaving an empty chair behind as if I had never existed. I needed to know what my options were. I closed the file without saving and instead opened a spreadsheet, the list of strategic partners I had personally managed. Names, contacts, work habits, even past emergencies, and how I resolved them. I went through each line, and one thought took shape in my mind. They don't work with Vital Core. They work with me. That truth wasn't new, but it was the first time I had allowed myself to face it. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I left, Vital Core wouldn't just lose an employee, it would lose part of its backbone. And Ava, the one they'd just given an opportunity, had no idea how to hold it together. Right then, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave quietly. I would watch. I would wait. And when the time came, I would act. The following week stretched endlessly. On the surface, I worked as usual, coordinating medical equipment shipments to new clinics in Indiana, fixing a backlog issue with the Kansas City warehouse. Ava, meanwhile, started joining meetings, often arriving late and leaving early. She now had a personal assistant, a girl even younger than her, who took meticulous notes but never asked questions. Ava didn't speak to me. She didn't acknowledge me in meetings either. Between us was a silence that said too much to be broken. Greg, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. I caught him watching me more than once from the hallway, studying my expression as if searching for cracks. One afternoon, he asked me into his office. I know this isn't easy to accept, he said quietly. I just nodded. Linda has her reasons. The board thinks Ava brings a new vision. Vision doesn't replace experience, I said. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to be honest. Greg stayed silent for a long moment, then sighed. I don't agree with how this was handled. But I don't get the final say. I stood up. I understand. But I hope you also understand that I won't stay silent forever. He looked at me the way someone does when they've just heard a polite but serious warning. By next week, the cracks began to show. Ava sent the wrong delivery schedule to a clinic in Ohio, causing dozens of appointments to be postponed. She blamed the software, then the tech team. No one argued, but I knew the clients on the other side of those emails were starting to lose trust. A day later, Ava held a full team meeting, opening with a speech about system innovation and modernization. I sat quietly at the end of the table, listening to her describe concepts she'd never actually managed. Then she announced she would be adjusting a few roles to align with the new vision. I was removed from the regional coordination group. In exchange, I was offered an internal advisory role on legacy process management. The title sounded like a system scheduled for deletion. That night, I sat in front of my computer for 3 hours. I rewrote the resignation letter. But this time, I didn't save it, I sent it. Directly to Linda, copying Greg and the HR director. The subject line read, Official Notice from Cassandra Bennett. In the letter, I thanked the company for 5 years of collaboration. I listed my achievements, initiatives, and projects. But I also wrote clearly, my departure is not out of disappointment. It is because I no longer believe that competence is valued as a key factor in this organization's growth. I ended the letter with one line. No anger, no defiance, just truth. I will leave the same way I have always worked, quietly, efficiently, and leaving a space large enough for someone to wonder why they didn't notice it sooner. I hit send at 4:58 on a Friday afternoon. 2 minutes before, the system automatically sent out the company's weekly birthday emails. I shut down my computer, stood up, and felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. I knew my story wasn't over. I was only turning the page to a chapter I would write myself instead of waiting for someone else to decide how it should end. I didn't expect Linda to respond right away, and she didn't. Monday morning, I arrived at the office on time as usual. I didn't change my routine, didn't mention the email I'd sent, and didn't bring up the fact that I would be gone in 2 weeks. I wanted my last days at VitalCore to pass quietly, but not invisibly. Ava acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled at everyone, moved from department to department with her assistant, taking charge of areas she still didn't truly understand. I began noticing a shift in people's eyes. The confidence they once had was fading, replaced by doubt, silent but unmistakable. That afternoon, as I prepared for my final project meeting, Greg stopped by my desk. "Cassandra, Linda wants to see you." I closed my laptop and stood. I knew this conversation would come sooner or later. Linda's office was on the top floor, with glass walls overlooking downtown. When I walked in, she was standing by the window, a white porcelain cup in hand. On her desk lay a printed copy of my resignation letter, marked up in red ink. "What do you think you're doing?" she said without turning around, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. I stayed silent. She set the cup down and turned to face me. Her smile was gone. The warmth she displayed in leadership meetings had vanished, replaced by the cold authority of someone too accustomed to power. "Do you really believe walking away like this will shake us? That your absence will bring this system down?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't believe anything. I'm simply stepping away from a place that no longer fits." Linda moved closer, leaning on the desk. "Do you know what frustrates me most about people like you, Cassandra? It's that quiet arrogance. You think because you're good at what you do, you get to challenge how things are run? This isn't a family, it's a business. And business needs youth, energy, people who can keep up with the times." "I understand," I said evenly. "But businesses also need competence, and that's no longer valued here." Her expression darkened. "You're crossing a line." I didn't reply. The air between us grew heavy, but I knew I wasn't the one trembling in that room. "What do you plan to do after you leave?" she asked, her tone hardening. "Recruit our clients? Badmouth us to partners?" "I plan to stay quiet," I said simply, "but I won't stop anyone who decides for themselves who they want to work with." Linda gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive. You have no right to take anyone with you. They're VitalCore's property." I smiled faintly. "Then I hope you can keep them." I turned and walked out, leaving Linda by the window, her hand tightening around the cup. I knew the conversation hadn't changed her mind, but it had planted a seed of doubt, and that was enough. The next day, I began my final task at VitalCore, the handover. I didn't do it half-heartedly. On the contrary, I documented everything with precision: the emergency order protocols, the peak season logistics workflows, the list of flexible partners capable of negotiating during crises. Everything was organized, detailed, and clear, like a map only the creator could draw. But I didn't send it to Ava. I sent it to Greg, and only Greg. "Thank you," he said quietly when he received it. "No one can replace you right away. They'll realize that soon enough." I nodded. I don't need them to. I just hope they learn something from it. During my final days, I worked differently. I spent more time reconnecting with people from my old network, partners, distributors, and clients, not to recruit them, to listen. And almost all of them asked the same question: "Will you still be managing our account?" I only said, "I'm considering a new direction. When I'm ready, I'll let you know." Their reaction wasn't worry, it was anticipation. I felt as if I were standing at the edge of two worlds, one closing, one beginning to open. On my last day, I arrived early. I cleared my desk, deleted personal data, and took a moment to look around the office I'd spent 5 years building. Ava didn't come to say goodbye. Linda never showed up. Greg walked me to the door, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Good luck, Cassandra, and don't let anyone underestimate you again." I smiled. I've learned my lesson. As I stepped out of the building, the late afternoon light spilled across the street. autumn leaves drifting in the wind. I didn't feel sad, only light, not because I was leaving something behind, but because I had finally reclaimed something I hadn't realized I'd lost on my climb up the ladder, myself. I left Vital Core on a Friday afternoon at the end of the month, just as the wind began to change. On the drive home, I didn't feel anything in particular. Not anger, not regret, not even the sense of relief I thought I would. Just a strange emptiness, like slipping out of a shirt that had been too tight for too long. That weekend, I did nothing. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't answer a single email. I took Emily to the park, and later, we stopped for ice cream at her favorite shop from when she was in kindergarten. For the first time in years, I was fully present with my daughter, not half listening while checking my phone or worrying about another meeting. "I like it when you're home," Emily said as we watched the sunset over the lake. I looked at her and smiled, but I didn't answer right away, because I knew this peace was temporary. I couldn't stay home forever. I needed a plan. Monday morning, I woke early. Not to go to the office, but to start the next phase, rebuilding my career on my own terms. I opened my laptop and began listing everyone I had worked with, the relationships I had spent 5 years building. None of them was Vital Core's property, no matter what Linda once claimed. They were people. They trusted me because I understood their work, not because my name appeared under a company domain. I reached out to a few trusted contacts first: Janet from Serenity Health, Tom from Orion Medical Devices, and Nathan from the Illinois State Supply Division. I didn't ask for favors. I simply told them I had left Vital Core and was exploring new opportunities. Their responses surprised me. "If you need a referral, I'm ready," Janet texted back almost instantly. "If you start something of your own, let me know." "I believe in how you work," Tom wrote. Nathan called me directly. "Cass, to be honest, we've been worried since Ava showed up. The last time we worked with her, the delivery schedule and paperwork were both wrong. If you're planning to start something, I want to be your first client." I sat there for a long moment, not out of emotion, but because a quiet certainty was beginning to take shape inside me. They didn't want a company. They wanted reliability, and I was the one who had built that. I started sketching ideas for my own venture, a consulting and logistics coordination firm, specializing in medical equipment supply chains for mid-sized organizations. Not a giant corporation, but something agile, ethical, and grounded in competence. A business where I could choose my clients, design systems the right way, and work only with people who respected real ability. I called it Core Line Logistics. A simple name, but one that carried both meanings: the core and the line, the backbone and the connection. Exactly what I had always been in every system I managed. 3 weeks after leaving Vital Core, I had a logo, a basic website, a professional domain, and, most importantly, a signed proposal from Serenity Health worth 6 figures. I hadn't expected it to happen that fast. Around the same time, news began reaching me from the old company. Ava was struggling. Projects were falling behind. Orion, their largest partner, had just withdrawn from a key contract, citing a lack of transparency in operations. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant there was no one left capable of holding the system together. Greg called me one afternoon. "Cassandra," he said with quiet regret, "Linda's not doing well. The board is reviewing several of her recent appointments. Clients are starting to complain about Ava directly." I didn't respond. Greg hesitated, then asked, "Would you ever consider coming back if things change?" I looked out the window. The late sun filtered through red and orange leaves. "I've already stepped out, Greg, and I think I'm on the right path." He sighed. "I understand, and I'm glad you are." After that call, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to believe before. I never needed Vital Core as much as Vital Core needed me. The loyalty I once gave them, steadfast, unquestioned, was never an obligation. It was a choice. And now, I've made a new one. This time, I chose myself. When the first official contract with Serenity Health was signed, I sat in front of the screen for a long time. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. I had just stepped through a door I could never go back through. Serenity wasn't a small client. They had once been one of Vital Core's top 3 strategic partners, And now they were placing their full trust in me, the woman who had walked away from Vital Core without a word. I threw myself into the work with a kind of energy I thought I had lost. For 4 straight days, I barely left my desk except to take care of Emily. I audited Serenity's entire supply chain, found 8 recurring flaws in their heavy equipment distribution process, renegotiated with 3 vendors to build a backup system, and implemented a real-time order tracking platform, the same one Vital Core had shelved for years because, as they said, the budget didn't allow it. When the project wrapped, Janet, Serenity's operations director, called me at 10 that night, her voice trembling with emotion. "Cass, I don't even know how to thank you. We've never seen anyone handle a crisis with this much calm and precision." I smiled. "I used to do that every day for 5 years. No one ever noticed." "I noticed," she said, "and I'll make sure everyone else learns your name soon enough." After the call, I looked around my tiny workspace, a dining table turned desk, 1 laptop, a few notebooks, and a soft yellow lamp. Yet somehow I felt more powerful than I ever had before. News about Core Line Logistics began to spread. I hadn't announced anything or done a single thing to market it. But the people who had worked with me all those years at Vital Core knew exactly who had kept things running smoothly. Tom from Orion was the second to reach out. "Cass, let's be honest," he said on Zoom. "Since you left, Ava's been trying to replace you. It's like someone brought a wrench to fix a digital lock. Doesn't fit, doesn't work." I gave a small laugh. "I'm not here to speak badly about anyone, Tom. You don't have to. The numbers speak for themselves. Orders are late, customers are complaining, and the support system's a mess. I just filed a request to terminate our contract with them. But before I do, would you consider partnering with Orion?" I thought for a few seconds. Orion had once been untouchable when I was at Vital Core. And now, "I'll send you a proposal," I said. 3 days later, the deal was signed. Within 2 months, Coreline had 3 more clients. I hired a part-time assistant, Lana, a final-year logistics student, quick and perceptive. My small apartment gradually turned into a miniature operations hub, one wall covered in project charts and delivery maps. Every morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and found not orders from a boss, but invitations from clients. It was a kind of freedom I hadn't known existed. Then the news from Vital Core began to roll in. Greg called me for the 3rd time in less than a month. This time his voice carried real worry. "Linda's been suspended. The board launched an internal audit. They're trying to figure out what went wrong. I could guess. You can't replace the one holding the structure together and expect it not to fall." Greg told me Ava was drowning in crisis. Their biggest client, Morrison and Telford, had just terminated their contract, not just over operational failures, but because, as the report said, no qualified person could be found to take accountability. "You know what they're thinking, right, Cass?" Greg asked. "That's the only person who couldn't be there anymore." He didn't argue. After a long pause, he added, "Some members of the board want to bring you back. Not to your old role, something higher. Regional Operations Director. You'd have full authority to rebuild." I stayed quiet. A part of me had once dreamed of hearing those words, believing that if justice existed, Vital Core would one day recognize my worth. But now that the moment had come, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I was done chasing recognition. I had built something of my own, on integrity, skill, and conscience. Things Vital Core had long forgotten. "Thank you, Greg," I said softly. "But I won't be coming back." He exhaled, not surprised. "I figured as much. You've changed. Not changed. Just living honestly now." When the call ended, I stood and opened the window. Chicago's early winter air was cold, but the sunlight still felt warm. I didn't need to go back to win. I didn't need revenge. Walking away had been the cleanest, most powerful strike of all. And the irony was, Linda had always believed she controlled everything. But what she never could control was the real value of a person who finally decided to stand up and walk out. News of Vital Core's instability began to appear quietly but unmistakably across industry journals. One article in Healthcare Logistics Weekly ran the headline, "Vital Core loses 3 major partners in its first quarter. System failure or leadership crisis." I'm not someone who jumps into corporate drama, but I knew exactly where the truth lay. Linda hadn't been officially dismissed, but she was completely excluded from strategic meetings. As for Ava, once celebrated as the future of VitalCore, she had now become the target of every internal criticism, even from those who used to champion her. I heard most of this from Greg, but there were things I could never have known until a message arrived from Ava. When I saw her name appear on my phone, I thought I was imagining it. I had blocked her number the day I resigned to avoid any unnecessary theatrics. But this time, the message came from a personal email. Cassandra, I know I have no right to ask, but if possible, I'd like to meet. Just once. There are things you should know. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the words on the screen for over 10 minutes. Should I meet her? My instinct said yes. 3 days later, we met at a small cafe in Lakeview, a quiet place where no one knew who we were. Ava arrived first. She looked nothing like the confident young woman who once walked into VitalCore as if she owned it. The dark circles under her eyes, the wrinkled coat, the guarded expression, they told their own story. Thank you for coming, she began softly. Her voice was small, unsteady. I didn't respond. I sat down across from her and waited. I know you don't need to hear anything from me, Ava said, staring into her untouched coffee. But I'm not here to defend myself. I just want to end things properly. I tilted my head slightly. I'm listening. She took a long breath. You know I'm Linda's niece, but what you don't know is the condition I had to accept to get hired at VitalCore. I stayed silent. She said to me, You'll get the job, but you'll have to prove you can replace anyone, even my best. And that person was you. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud still felt heavy. From the start, Ava continued, I wasn't there to learn. I was there to eliminate you. Because if I didn't, there'd be no place for me. And you did it well, I said quietly, without bitterness. Ava gave a faint, tired laugh. I thought I did. But then I realized I wasn't as good as I believed. You weren't just skilled, you had people's trust. And that's something I could never fake. She looked up at me, for the first time without defiance. I destroyed everything, not because I wanted to, but because I never should have been given that power in the first place. But Linda doesn't accept failure, especially not when it comes from the person she handpicked to replace you. I still didn't know what to say. Ava pulled a thin envelope from her bag and placed it on the table. These are copies of some internal emails. I don't know if you'll need them, but they might help if any legal trouble comes your way. Linda once said she'd sue you if clients left VitalCore for Coreline. These prove they already knew the losses had nothing to do with you. They were caused by their own failures. I took the envelope. I didn't say thank you, but I knew she understood. Why are you doing this? I asked. Ava was silent for a moment, then said, Because I used to think I had to be like her to be respected. But you showed me the opposite, that a person can walk away quietly, and that quiet can carry more weight than any fight. I left the cafe with a feeling that was hard to name. I didn't forgive Ava, but I no longer hated her either. Everyone is a product of a system. Not everyone is brave enough to break free and admit they were wrong. As for Linda, I knew she wouldn't give up easily. But I wasn't someone she could control anymore. Now I had my own clients, my own team, my own voice. And for the first time, I had the power to choose how to respond, to strike back, or to keep building something no one could destroy. I chose the latter, because I had learned the most important lesson from my fall. Sometimes the deepest revenge isn't about going back to reclaim what was lost. It's about building something new, so complete, so untouchable, that what once mattered no longer does. When I opened my email at 6 on Monday morning, the message from Janet, Serenity's operations director, was the first thing I saw. The subject line was only 6 words long. We need to talk, urgently. I assumed it was the usual supply chain issue, maybe a shipment delay or a warehouse backlog. But when Janet joined the Zoom call an hour later, her tone wasn't calm and measured like it always was. Cass, this is more serious than anything we've handled before. VitalCore is under investigation. I straightened in my chair. Investigation for what? I asked. There's evidence they signed fake contracts with at least 2 clinics that don't exist in Michigan to inflate quarterly revenue numbers. The Federal Health Oversight Agency is involved now. A chill ran down my spine. Janet continued. Since one of those clients was under your portfolio when you were at VitalCore, your name might come up in the cross-check. Just as a routine verification. I nodded slowly. I understand. I had nothing to do with it, but I'll be ready. Janet looked at me for a moment. I don't doubt you, Cass. I just wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news. After the call ended, I sat still for a long time. 10 minutes later, the headlines spread across every industry feed. VitalCore has been temporarily suspended from federal hospital distribution contracts. Partial account freeze. Several executives are under investigation. Linda's name appeared everywhere, not as the powerful female leader they once praised her to be, but as the face of systemic fraud and abuse of power. A few hours later, Greg called. His voice sounded heavier than I'd ever heard. Linda was officially terminated this morning. Ava resigned. The board's emergency committee is restructuring everything, and some of them are mentioning you. I frowned. What do you mean? Not to bring you back, but they're wondering if you might help stabilize the remaining client network. Things are on the verge of collapse. I didn't answer. Greg's tone softened. I know you've moved on, and you don't owe anyone a thing, but I also know you were always the last one standing when everyone else walked away. I just hope maybe this time you'll be that person again. When the call ended, I stood by the window, looking out at spring in Chicago. The sun was gentle, but my chest felt heavy. What I felt wasn't triumph, it wasn't satisfactory. It was something closer to grief. A quiet sorrow for the people left behind. Not for Linda, not even for Ava, but for the warehouse clerks, the field technicians, the nurses waiting for equipment that might never arrive. The people who had no idea the system they relied on had been rotting from the inside. I had once been one of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The figures on Coreline's expansion sheet replayed in my mind. The Minneapolis branch project, the pending contract with St. Charles General, the candidate list waiting for interviews. Everything was moving forward. I was building something real, strong, and honest. Yet I couldn't ignore the truth. Somewhere else, innocent people were paying the price for decisions made by the powerful. The next morning, I sent Janet an email. I won't return to VitalCore, and I won't represent them. But if necessary, I'm willing to temporarily coordinate equipment distribution for the remaining partners as an independent contractor. Her reply arrived within an hour. Perfect. I'll gather the people who still have a voice in the industry. If you take the lead, they'll follow. And just like that, Coreline became something no one expected, a rescue team for a collapsing system. I reached out to my former colleagues, the ones who had quietly left VitalCore over the past year. Some were freelancing, some were unemployed, and a few were rebuilding their careers from scratch. When I explained my plan, they didn't need convincing. We're not doing this to save the company, I told them during our first online meeting. We're doing it so no patient has to pay the price for someone else's mistakes. I re-established shipment tracking templates, reopened frozen vendor channels, and reassigned tech teams to critical sites. Everyone worked like it was a disaster relief mission, and maybe, in a way, it was. Throughout it all, no one from VitalCore ever thanked us. They were too busy fighting fires, drafting public apologies, scrambling through the investigation, trying to contain what was left of their reputation. But that didn't matter. I didn't need thanks. I didn't need to be remembered. The only thing I needed was to know that when I had the choice to stay out or step in, to let things fall or help hold them together, I chose what was right. In that moment, I finally understood why I had left, and I understood why I came back, though not to return. I had chosen freedom, I had chosen myself, and when everything collapsed, I chose to be the one who still kept the fire burning, not for the company that failed, but for the people who never deserved to sink with it. 6 months after the biggest crisis in VitalCore's history, I received an unexpected email from Greg. It wasn't a report or a request for help, just a link to an article in an industry magazine. VitalCore closes Midwest offices. Executives are under pressure to resign. Former CEO faces investor lawsuits. I clicked it slowly, without curiosity, as if I were reading a headline from someone else's life. Linda's name appeared throughout the article. After being suspended by the board, she had tried to appeal and failed. Major investors pulled out, the logistics chain fell apart, and the collapse didn't happen in one blow. It unraveled, piece by piece. Ava's name was no longer followed by the phrase promising young talent. She had quietly gone back to school, enrolling in a master's program in supply chain management. I knew that because a few weeks earlier I had seen her at a logistics symposium in Austin. We sat a few rows apart. She was the one who walked up first. "Cass," she said with a nod. "You've always been the person I tried to measure up to, even when I pretended otherwise." I looked at her. She was no longer the arrogant girl I once knew, but she wasn't broken either. There was a calm in her eyes, the kind that only comes after facing your own reflection without flinching. "Thank you for not exposing me back then," she said. "You could have. Most people would have, but you stayed silent. And somehow that changed everything." I didn't respond. I just smiled. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words. After the event, I drove back to Coreline's office in Chicago. The space was bigger now, brighter, busier, but it still held the things I'd vowed to protect: respect, transparency, and trust. Coreline was no longer a startup. We had signed long-term contracts with 7 major hospitals across the Midwest. Each time a deal closed, I reminded myself, it didn't happen because of luck. It happened because of one brave decision: walking away when it still would have been easier to stay. One afternoon, I sat with Lana, my first teammate, the one who had been there when Coreline was nothing more than an idea on paper. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, sipping her tea. "You went from being pushed out to leading a new path." I laughed. "I just did what someone had to do." Lana smiled softly. "You didn't win back your old title, but you won yourself back. And that's the real victory." That night, I came home late. The city lights shimmered outside, and everything felt weightless. I opened my laptop, looked at Coreline's 5-year plan, then closed it again. A good plan means nothing without the courage to act when everything falls apart. I stepped out onto the balcony. The October breeze was cool against my skin. I looked at the city lights and thought of the people who had once hurt me and also helped me grow. Linda taught me that power built on fear will always collapse. Ava taught me that sometimes all people need is to see another way, to realize they don't have to repeat someone else's mistakes. And I learned that walking away from a place that no longer deserves you isn't failure, it's self-respect. My story doesn't end with a dramatic victory. There was no revenge, no triumphant return, but I don't need that. All I need to know is that when everything fell apart, I didn't. I stayed standing, I kept moving, and I rebuilt, not to prove anyone wrong, but to remind myself that I was always worth more. If you're listening to this story, maybe part of you has felt something similar: overlooked, underestimated, or silenced because you thought you weren't strong enough. Trust me, sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight back. It's to walk away. And never forget, no one can take away the worth you've built quietly, day after day. You are not a victim. You are the one rewriting your own chapter, and that, in itself, is the deepest kind of victory. Maybe you're hearing this on a quiet night or in the middle of your own storm. Wherever you are, if you've ever felt left behind or questioned whether persistence still matters, then Cass's story might just be yours too. So tell me, which moment in this journey spoke to you the most? Was it when Cass decided to leave, or when she came back, not for revenge, but to keep things from collapsing? Share your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your story too. And if you believe that justice doesn't always arrive with applause, but sometimes quietly, steadily, and right on time, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are so many more stories ahead about ordinary people strong enough to change entire systems. Thank you for listening.